Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a good day. I've had a great day so far. Hurricane Ian apparently is going to pay us a visit for the next couple of days. So I've been to the grocery store all stocked up, ready to go. Kids are out of school tomorrow. And my thoughts definitely go out to any of our listeners and everybody who is affected by that terrible, terrible hurricane that hit yesterday. I watched it kind of all day and man, just devastating stuff. So anyways, real quick, I'm going to stand up and show you. I just got my shirt that I ordered and I like it. It's pretty cool. This is kind of tie-dye. You can't tell because of the LED lights in here, but the print quality is really good, so check it out if you want some. And also launched the Patreon. Thanks to everybody who's joined so far. I was surprised. So for those of you who don't subscribe, no worries. You're still going to get the episodes as usual. Nothing changes for you. I'm not going to do any kind of like bonus episodes or anything like that. But it's just a way that people wanted to have an ad-free option of the podcast as well as just support it monthly. So very grateful for those who have. And I'm going to do a little Patreon thank you graphic tomorrow. So my plan for later is to go through, and I haven't even started, but at some point I will get this out tonight. All of these new filings in Lori and Chad's case. I think they're like 30 something pages and more than that. So I got to weed through those, pick out the good points and update you guys on that one. I think there's trouble in paradise. All right. Music fact of the day before we get started. Rod Stewart's song, Maggie May. It's actually a song about a relationship between a college boy and a much older woman. The singer is bitter about the relationship, but he's bitter that it's over, but feels grateful for the experience. So I listened to it and it fits. So there you go. All right. We have a lot to catch up on in the Wagner case because they have had some problems with this jury. Unfortunately, hopefully everybody's okay and nothing's too serious, but we had to stop early. Let's see, the day before yesterday. Then we had a full day yesterday. And then today they called it off because a juror is sick. So I just decided to wait and do it today because I'm going to tell you guys, going through all these surveillance videos of the cars going to and from the murder scenes, the timestamps were off and I had to rewind like 50 times. And by midnight last night, I was like, I'm done, y'all. So I do have those ready to go on here. So if you're on YouTube, you can see them. I'm going to try to upload them to the Google Drive. And those of you who just listen, you can see them as well. All right. So day 13 on Wagner. We started back with the ballistics guy on the stand. He wasn't on very long. So he examined the evidence from each scene having to do with the firearms. And he was asked to make comparisons about certain pieces being fired by certain weapons. And he does a microscopic comparison. I'm going to show you a really cool picture here. He does a microscopic comparison with two microscopes where he can look at a test on one side and then the comparison evidence on the other side. So on the graphic here, you see the kind of microphone that he uses, and then you can see how he was able to tell it was fired from the same weapon. So the 30 by 726 from scene one, Chris and Gary Seniors. So the arrow on the right, the picture on the bottom right, you see a red arrow pointing, and that's the dividing line between the test cartridge and then the actual one from the scene. And as you can tell, it matches up perfectly and it shows those lancing grooves. So they do feel like the weapons used for Chris Sr. and Gary were the same as well as Kenneth. So that sort of tells you maybe who Billy murdered, because we know Jake admitted to 5, although I think that number probably could grow in Jake's favor. I don't know. I really do think that Billy shot Chris Sr. and Gary and then freaked out when Jake started lighting the house up. I don't think he was sad he lost his friend. So to help stabilize the flight path of a bullet, manufacturers cut spiral grooves into gun barrels, and the pattern of grooves on the barrel leaves corresponding raised and lowered areas on the surface of the bullets fired from it. So measuring the number and widths of these grooves impressions can help firearms examiners narrow down the range of possible weapons to which that was fired. He also looks for unique scratches on the fired bullets to see if they've been fired from the same gun. So, like, for instance, Jake and them made the homemade silencers, and I believe they stuck something down in there to scratch them up to throw them off. If that's this case, I'm pretty sure it was. He concluded all bullets had been fired from the same gun at Chris Sr. and Gary's. Then he examined the 40 caliber cartridge casing found in the kitchen at Chris Sr. and Gary's and compared that to that one casing found beside the bed at Kenneth's. Also, they were fired from the same weapon. I'm pulling up the wrong thing. It was from a Glock. And he also found out that it was a second generation Glock. And also, that was the same gun. Remember, they found that bullet underneath the deck. That all came from the same place. So he asked some coworkers about the unique impressions on the casings of the 22 caliber pistol, which was Jake's gun, as we think, because it was a little weird for him. And he actually called and talked to the manufacturer of the gun in Germany, and they concluded that the 1911 made the impressions at scene 2. So that would be Frankie, Hannah Hazel, Dana, Hannah Mae, and little Chris. And all those cartridge casings were fired from the same gun. And if you look at the top left here, that is the kind of gun that Jake used. Gosh, man, just brutal people, man. So on cross, it was really quick. Walther Colt 22 can hold 10 bullets in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. So that means a total of 11 shots can be fired from that gun without reloading. So on redirect, the prosecutor asked if a homemade silencer could be welded to the end of the barrel. And White said it would affect the accuracy if it's not aligned correctly. So that was kind of it as far as the guns. And then this next picture, it shows the gun that George allegedly had, which was an SKS rifle. I do not think that is the actual gun that he used, but just to show that's what George was carrying. If you remember, they said George froze up when he was supposed to shoot Chris Sr., and then Jake did it. So next was the shoe expert, and her name was Suzanne Elliott, and she opted out of being recorded on camera or audio. So the shoes were actually one of the first pieces of evidence that linked the Wagners to the murders. We know Angela admitted to buying the shoes in her confession, and she also admitted that she lied to investigators in Montana when she said she got rid of the shoes, saying the boys didn't like them. Remember, she's seen on video buying them. I tried to find that video. I can't find it now. It's like it's been scrubbed, but if you guys know where it is, let me know. We also know that they found the receipt. And if you remember, Jake and George and their 2 children were waiting in the car while Angela's buying the murder shoes. Stay classy, Wagners. Elliot said she could tell the shoes that left the impression at Chris Sr.'s were very cheap. And so the video will be introduced later when the agent who discovered the video testifies. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of these people are going to be back and forth testifying about things as they come up. So shoe impressions were left at both Chris Sr.'s and Dana's houses. She found the shoes herself at a Walmart in Waverly after the database they normally use yielded no results. I've seen a forensic file episode on that, and it's really cool. Like that's one of the ways they kind of zeroed in on the Night Stalker was he was wearing a pair of shoes. I think 1 pair had been sold in LA, and then the press leaked that out, and then he stopped wearing the shoes. So then they couldn't, they kind of knew it was him, but he always had that unique shoe impression. So Dana's now deceased dad, bless his heart, Leonard Manley, who lost so many. He lost Dana. He lost Hannah Mae. He lost little Chris. He lost Frankie. He had actually bought a size 10 of the same shoes that George and Jake were wearing the night of the murders. He was a size 10. George and Jake wore a 10 and a half and 11. And Leonard, I'm going to throw a picture up here. Leonard was interviewed and told investigators that he had thrown the shoes away. So they went to the trash dump and found them. And apparently Leonard was none too happy they took his shoes from the trash. And he just really felt like that him and his children were being targeted, because I think in the very beginning, Bobby Joe was sort of on their radar as a possible suspect. It was confirmed there was no size 10 at the scene, but they were submitted and tested for DNA, and he was ruled out. So here are, in the picture top left, is the actual shoe impression that they got with, I believe, the gunpowder. Or I'm sorry, the fingerprint powder that they use. And then the bottom left pictures are really hard to see. I tried to lighten them up. It didn't help. Top right photo is Leonard Manley's actual shoes. And then below those are an example of the shoes that the boys wore that night. So anyways, next we had a criminal intelligence analyst with Ohio BCI. And so mainly her job is to collect the phone records for all the victims. They do social media, they do financials. And she said that their unit was all hands on deck with the Roden case. It was the biggest criminal case in Ohio history. So clearly it got a lot of attention. And she was assigned to the case full time. So she explains how the data is saved, and they could obtain that through search warrants, as we know, and then they can plot the results on a map like Google Earth or like law enforcement mapping software that they have. And they had phones from Frankie, Hannah Hazel, and Kenneth. The others were not found, so they relied on what they got from the phone company. And she said that's not as good as having the phone itself. The details can be limited. They were able to obtain records from everyone except Gary Roden. He didn't have a phone. Gary seemed like a really simple dude. She started at 8 or 9 p.m. on the 21st through the records to look for any activity leading up to those murders. And this didn't come across very clear on the screen. I tried, and I'm not going to leave it up here very long, but I tried to darken it to make it look a little better, but sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Chris Sr. had 2 separate phone lines, by the way. So at 8:51 p.m., he has a voice call to Billy Wagner, and the duration was 27 seconds. At 8:56 p.m., he has an outgoing text to Dana. 9:02, an incoming call from Dana, which was almost 8 minutes long. 9:14, an incoming text from Dana. 9:18, an outgoing call to little Chris. 9:30, outgoing text to Dana. 9:43, incoming call from little Chris. Little Chris was on restrictions, and I think they found his wallet in Billy's safe, so maybe little Chris was wanting his stuff back. Poor little dude. At 10:02, there is an outgoing call to a Robin Rodell. The duration of that was 1 minute, which probably was like a really quick call. Anything that's just like a few seconds, she tends to think goes right to voicemail. So at 10:22 p.m., the outgoing call to Billy Wagner, that was a 0-second duration. So that went to voicemail. Now at this point, the boys are there. Billy's there for this fake drug deal, I believe. And here's what's interesting to me. At 10:47, he has an outgoing call to Hannah Mae. The duration was 4 seconds, so likely that went to voicemail. 10:52, another call to Billy, to his phone. Remember, Billy had left his phone at home with Angela and actually had told her to use it or something, so it looked like their phones were home at the time of the murder. But that was a way to kind of get him in a position to where they could shoot him. At 10:53, 1 minute after that call to Billy, he has an outgoing text to Dana. Then his second phone number at 10:54 calls Billy. The duration of that is 8 seconds. And then 10:55, call to Billy, duration 5 seconds. So 3 minutes or so before he's murdered, he texts Dana, Unfortunately, I think her phone was gone and they didn't get anything off those text messages. They haven't said if anything recovered from Chris's phone was did they even get Chris's phone back? Let me look here. Phones were not recovered. So those text messages, I do not believe they were able to get, unfortunately, because, why was he texting Dana in the middle of Billy being there about this big drug deal? But I think it's really sweet because you could tell him and Dana talked a lot in spite of the fact they were divorced. So we go to Dana's phone. Her phone was not recovered. And she worked double, if you remember. And she was seen on surveillance at a gas station talking with a friend. So at 11:25 p.m., all activity leading up to her murder were texts to Chris Sr. and Little Chris. Her last incoming text was 11:27 from Little Chris. At this point, Chris Sr. and Gary have been murdered. Her last outgoing text was to Chris Sr. at 3:32 a.m. And if you remember in the openings, Jake, when he confessed, said he thought Dana was awake because he could see the light of her phone. So 3:32, this is about the time. And when I pull up the surveillance videos, which I have for you guys, you'll see it couldn't have been long after that last outgoing text that she was murdered. So Hannah Mae, I'm going to throw this up. Sorry. Still learning this little thing, y'all. You just gonna have to bear with me. Her phone was not recovered. There was one phone number they couldn't track that she was in contact with that night. It was just a throwaway phone. 9:02 p.m. She has a series of texts with her cousin Kendra, and then send texts from 9:15 to 9:45. And in between those times, she's got contact with Jake. So here is the contacts with Jake on the evening of the murders. She had an outgoing text at 9:02. He answered at 9:03. She had an incoming from Jake at 9:07. And at 9:08, 2 texts. She had an outgoing call to Jake at 9:35, went to voicemail. She had 2 incoming texts from Jake at 9:43, and then 2 outgoing texts to him at 9:44. Her final communication were 2 texts to Corey Holdren, who she was dating at the time. Also, Little Chris, his phone wasn't recovered. 9:14 p.m., he sent 8 texts to his mom, Dana. 9:18, incoming call from Chris Sr., his dad. The duration of that call was 3 minutes, 19 seconds. 9:22 and 9:24, he had outgoing text to Dana. 9:43, an outgoing call to Chris Sr., that went to voicemail. 9:43 again, must have called back to back, went to voicemail. 11:25, 2 incoming texts from Dana. And then he had 2 outgoing texts at 11:25 to her. 11:27, 4 incoming texts from Dana. Last outgoing, 11:27, an outgoing to Dana. And then his last communication was a last 11:27 outgoing text to Dana. Frankie's phone was recovered. 9:04, 2 incoming texts from Chelsea, which is his oldest son, Brentley's mom. 9:05, outgoing call to Chelsea for a duration of 1.5 minutes, and they were coordinating childcare. So at 9:07, an incoming call from her, Chelsea, for 26 seconds. An outgoing at 9:09 to an unknown number that went to voicemail. Another outgoing to an unknown number, 6 seconds, likely voicemail. 9:09, incoming calls from Hannah Hazel. That was 4 seconds, voicemail. 9:09, again, incoming from Hannah Hazel, 2 seconds. And then 9:09, he had incoming from Chelsea again, 0 seconds, went to voicemail. 9:15 p.m., 4 incoming texts from Dana. 9:16, 2 outgoing texts to Dana. 9:16, he had an outgoing call to someone named Danny. The duration of that was 2 minutes and 34 seconds. The last phone call he made was 9:45 to Chelsea, his oldest son's mom, for 2 minutes and 24 seconds. And then a forensic Forensic extraction determined a photo of his boys sleeping was taken at 10:59 p.m., and that was the last activity for his phone. They did show that in court. Big E, Chasing Paper 89 on Twitter, was in the courtroom, said it was just the sweetest picture, but very sad knowing that was the last picture he took. They did not show that on screen. Hannah Hazel, her phone was recovered 8:58 p.m. that night. An incoming call from Frankie. It was 47 seconds long. 9:09 outgoing to Frankie, voicemail. Again, outgoing to Frankie at the same time, voicemail. 10:28 p.m., she had 4 incoming texts from her sister Miranda. And then at 10:41, 4 incoming texts from her sister Miranda. I think they were very close from what I've heard. 11:03, she sent a text to her sister. And then at 12:59 a.m., the last activity that Hannah Hazel had was an outgoing text to her sister. Kenneth Roden, 9:09, an outgoing call to his son Luke. They talked for almost 4.5 minutes. 9:33, and there were 2 texts. And then at 9:34, outgoing text to Stacy Rigsby, who was his ex-wife. 9:36 p.m., he had 2 incoming texts from Stacy, his ex-wife. 9:41, an outgoing text to Stacy. With AT&T, she was not able to get the contents from the phones recovered. And that was pretty much everybody. Dana, Little Chris, Hannah Mae, everybody whose phone was not recovered, I think was on AT&T. So I think it seems like it's kind of based on maybe the other people given their phones, and then you see those communications. So on Cross, it sounds like she'll be recalled at some point. There really wasn't much Cross. Next witness is Agent Scheider. He's a special agent with BCI Major Crimes Unit. He became the lead agent in this case in March of 2017. Normally, they don't help process crime scenes, but sometimes they'll go in and kind of do a double check or conduct their own little independent investigation. So they stayed at Chris Sr.'s about an hour and a half and got word to go to the sheriff's office because family was there and needed to be interviewed. The family that was at the sheriff's office at that time was Bobby Joe, James Manley, Billy Morgan, who was with Bobby Joe when she found Chris Sr., Gary, Hannah Hazel, and Frankie, and then Luke Roden, who is Kenneth's son, and he testified. Seems like a really nice kid. All of those guys discovered bodies. So he said they're the first piece of the puzzle, and that's where you start, is with the people that found the bodies. They decided to assign 2 majors who were local to Pike County to the BCI team because they had local contacts that could help assist, like uniformed officers that could go help with search warrants and things like that. After 10 or 11 months, one of the majors, Major Dickerson, left, and Alan Lewis was left on the case as a major locally. Things were confusing. He said there was a lot of information coming in. The media started arriving on scene. The Piketon PD was the staging area, and they needed to start organizing things since it was such a huge case. So he's kind of going through, like, what do we do on, like, D-Day? On the day all this happens, what is the most important? Family getting the most important evidence pieces, sent to the lab to get things going. So cyber agents are law enforcement and can do telephone extractions, DVR extractions, GPS units, things like that. It sounds like they also have civilians who are on staff, maybe just some good hackers that know what they're doing. But after they interviewed the family, and if you followed this case from the beginning, you've heard this, they had information that little Chris had been in an altercation with locals about 10 days before the murders, who had the last name of Jones. And the BCI found and cleared them. There were other members of that group who weren't family that I believe was involved in the altercation. And someone had indicated they were responsible for the murders. So they talked to these people, Isaiah and Larry Jones, and cleared them. But why would you take responsibility for the murder of 8 people? It's beyond me. I mean, it's like, is it funny? No, it's not funny. Most of the day was spent rounding that group up, and they established a tip system, and an ungodly number of tips came in. From start to finish, I believe he said it was like 11,000 tips that they got about this case. So he said as the tips would come in, the agent would go investigate, come back and report their findings. Then he goes through all of the reports that were written about this case. So 835 reports were written on the case, not including the lab reports. He authored about 165 of those reports himself. And he also did a lot of boots on the ground work. So he explains that one of the first things they do is what they call victimology, which is find out everything they can about the victims. And one of the first things they do these days in the tech age we live in is get the phone records. So they did talk to the family for information, want to know about spouses, ex-spouses, coworkers, friends, enemies, any kind of lead that they could get. They also contacted Facebook, banking accounts, and things like that so that they could have them lock those accounts to preserve them. They did a tower dump, which is seeing the tower dumps. What you do is you see who pings off that tower. But the problem is Pike County is such a small little place. So everybody was on like the same tower. They can ask for every device that is connected to the tower. They did. And that made it very difficult to weed through. Also, it's used by people who are passing through, like on the interstate. Our phones jump from tower to tower as we travel around town. He said the tower dump was not very helpful. Getting the records helps them narrow down the time of death. So you have to look at the last known activity on their phones, Facebook, debit cards, in-person contacts, and in Dana's case, surveillance, where she was talking to her friend at that convenience store. One thing that they found out quickly is with the limited service for cell reception, most people in the area actually communicated through like Facebook Messenger or some kind of a Wi-Fi enabled communication service. He said at the time they had 0 leads. It was a classic whodunit. And they rushed the testing on the ballistics and the shoe impressions because at the time that was really about all the evidence they had. As we know, there was very little evidence left at these crime scenes. I was talking to Big E about this case, and one of the first things actually that tipped off agents was when they went to the Wagners and saw spent shell casings in their driveway that looked really similar to some of the ones found at the crime scenes. So it's like you plan almost the perfect murder, and then you're careless, in your driveway, and then their ears go up, and then before you know it, they knew that it was the 22 caliber long rifle, 40 caliber Smith & Wesson, and some sort of 30 caliber rifle. The DNA wasn't helpful because it was mostly the victims, or the DNA was so saturated that they couldn't pull a profile. They also canvassed the neighborhood to ask if anyone saw anything, and the typical, do you have video cameras? They started doing that on Saturday, and the problem with that was that Union Hill Road was still blocked off. And so what few people lived in that area left because, number one, they were scared to death, or they left because it was hard to get in and out. So it took a long time for them to make contact with people who lived nearby the murder scenes. He said they got tips from psychics. They got tips from inmates. They got tips from the death of Prince the singer. I don't know how that came in, but that's literally what he said. He said people want to inject themselves into cases. And he said lots of inmates from various states said they had information because they wanted to get out of jail, essentially. Some people with mental illness were submitting tips that had no merit, but he said every tip was investigated, even if it meant agents had to go out of state to interview these people that said they had a tip. And the prosecutor said none of the inmate tips panned out, did they? And he kind of stops and smiles and says, not at that time. So we do know there was a jailhouse informant in this case who I'm curious to see if he's going to come in and see what he has to say. He said the records from Facebook are huge, huge files, and they're hard to sort through. And he said Facebook is not at all cooperative when it comes to these kind of investigations. The records are jumbled. Sometimes there can literally be 30,000 pages or more of information that they get. So as far as the shoes go, they knew they were looking for a size 11 shoe of a suspect. So they contacted all the Walmarts. There were like 15 to 17 within a 50-mile radius dating back to the beginning of 2016. They also got video surveillance of anybody who purchased those shoes. So you can imagine you got one person having to sit there, go through surveillance for months within, 15 to 17 Walmarts. Yeah. But hey, they found Angela on surveillance, so it's worth it. He said the roads they lived on don't get a lot of activity. There's no signs of forced entry, missing cameras. You got the DVR missing at Chris's. Family said cameras should have been here or there, but they weren't. And he said the difference in the scenes with Chris Sr. and Gary being dragged and the others not being dragged, was different for them. And he said the most interesting thing was how everybody in Dana's house with little Chris and Hannah Mae, how did 3 people get killed in their sleep and nobody woke up to defend themselves? So he said immediately he thought a suppressor had to have been used. We know Jake has admitted to that. And the suspects knew the scenes and the people, especially with Dana, Hannah Mae, and little Chris, because they had just moved 30 days prior. And family said there was a tiny amount of people who knew that information outside of family. So it was a really short list. Then they talked about the marijuana grow. He said, look, if it was over marijuana, the marijuana would have been missing. And he said they were not large grow ops. He said, you definitely take note of that, but it didn't lead the investigation. But at the same time, it hampers it because you can't rule it out. So they talk about the locations, and Kenneth's location, 799 Left Fork, was wrong. It's actually 1084 Left Fork Road. His residence, as well as Chris Sr. and Frankie's, was in Pike County. He says Dana's was Scioto County. At the beginning, they were told by Pike County it was in Pike, and the warrants were obtained through Pike County. I'm going to tell you right now, this defense attorney is going to be all over this because later on he gets into it. They began to get videos of where the victims were prior to the murder. We know Dana was at a gas station talking to a coworker, and Frankie had made a little store run earlier that evening. So when canvassing, they did recover some video footage from 2 locations that showed the cars, or what they think to be the cars that they were driving. So, and then one residence, if you're looking at the screen up there in yellow, he lives at the very top of Union Hill Road, and the resident normally lives in Michigan, but was actually in town and let investigators know he had cameras they could look at. But guess what? When they went with him to get the cameras, they were gone. And he said that, they were there when he left. So based on interviews with family and friends, the last contact, they had an idea of the time the murders occurred. They knew Kenneth would shower at Chris Sr.'s. So they knew a time frame of between 11 p.m. to 5 or 6 a.m. to look for suspicious activity. So we're going to start here with video number 1. The timestamps on these are off. That's what threw me off last night, even though I knew they were off. But yeah. So it's actually 14 minutes slower than the accurate time. So this is at 1:36 a.m. and you see a single car leaving the crime scenes. That was shot leaving Frankie and Hannah Hazel's. So then we jump to video 2 a.m., a single car going towards the crime scenes. Going towards the crime scenes. That was shot about 1.5 miles away from a camera. Video 3, this is a car going to Kenneth's. And this was at 2:41 a.m. Or 2:29 a.m. Remember, they rode by Kenneth's and then came back and then went back. So video 4 is at 2:41 a.m. You see 2 cars leaving the crime scenes and they appear to be traveling together. Now, the defense attorney objected, and I think that was sustained. Video 5, just continuing 2:41 a.m. in the top right corner, you're going to see these vehicles make a turn. They're making a left turn onto State Route 772, and that connects with Union Hill Road. Video number 6, 2:42 a.m., still on route 772. It's just a different view. I'm sorry. I think that might have been the wrong video. Video 7, this car is headed to Kenneth at 2:51 a.m. And you can see it going there. And then video number 8, this car is leaving Kenneth. It's going to come from the right side of the screen. So this is after Kenneth has been murdered. And you can just see those headlights coming. Lots of trees, very wooded. All right. So video 9, you see 2 cars passing back. They're coming left to right to go back onto Union Hill Road. This is the time they believed that they were going to murder Frankie, Hannah Mae, and little Chris. Video clip number 10, 3:19 a.m., 2 cars on Route 772 to Union Hill Road, which goes back to Dana's house. You'll see them come up the road on the top right of the screen here in just a second. And then video 11, this is 3:19 a.m., 2 cars traveling on Union Hill Road towards Dana's house. So this is right before Dana and little Chris and Hannah Mae are murdered. So they asked for DNA and phones from friends and family of the victims. Everyone provided their phones except for Jake. Wonder why. Now, they showed a picture from his interview from May 13, 2016 with agents from BCI. Now, you think he has a hat on here, but his hat's on the desk. That's how dark his hair was. We've seen Jake in court. It's kind of red colored. Remember, they dyed their hair to look like the brothers from the Boondock Saints movie, allegedly, even though the defense attorney will fight you on that. So he made clear there was nothing covering his hair. They learned later that this was not his natural hair color. And he said the more they talked to people, they learned a lot of people were in the victims' lives, and the absence of evidence at the scenes told them these murders were very well planned out. And they were. He said there were over 50 agents working this case. So on cross, the defense attorney says, you've given us a brief overview of the investigation. You're going to be recalled to explain various aspects of the investigations. And you will explain more about what you've talked about at a later date. And he says, yes. The defense says, you talked about Leonard Manley and his shoes he purchased. Do you remember the date he purchased them? And he said January or February. And the defense says February. And he's, I guess, you know. Defense asked, do you know when these shoes were retrieved from the trash? And it was just days after the crime. The answer for that was May 27th. So that would have been about a month after the crimes, actually. The defense says, you say this was a complex investigation. You preserved your investigation on hard drives. And he says, yes. The defense wants to know how many terabytes of information have you collected? And he said roughly 4. The defense wants to know how much a terabyte of information, as far as pages, holds. And he said a terabyte holds a ton of information. Then the defense says, you learned Dana's residence was in Scioto and not Pike. When did you learn that? And he said it wasn't until after the arrest and the indictments. He said, I don't know when, sometime after that. The defense attorney says, did you document that? And the defense and the agent said no. So the defense again, you did not document that? No. So the defense says, how did you learn her residence was in Scioto? And he said a Roden family member. Then it was checked through tax records. So then they verified. And the defense says no other questions. So then redirect, prosecutor said it was brought to your attention due to the way taxes are paid as far as which county Dana lived in. And he said yes. The prosecutor said this was post-indictment. Are there a lot of locations where crimes occurred in this case that are not in Pike County? And he said absolutely. So then the prosecutor said, As someone who's been involved in other cases and testified in those, are you aware, as long as there's a continuing course of conduct, any county the crime occurred is in has jurisdiction of that case? And then there's an objection because the defense attorney is going to jump all over this for sure. I don't know what he's going to try to do. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the consequences of that could be if they got an arrest warrant in the wrong county. That's a good thing for Scott Reich. Maybe we should reach out to him and ask. So he answered about the continuing course of conduct. Any county the crime occurred in has jurisdiction. And he said, based on my training and education, I'm aware that that's the case. So the prosecutor said, as long as some elements occurred in a county, that county has jurisdiction. And he said, absolutely. So the defense, of course, has to recross. Are you aware the Ohio Constitution requires the trial take place in the county the crime was committed? And the prosecution objects. The judge lets him answer. So the defense attorney again says, are you aware the Ohio Constitution requires the trial take place in the county the crimes were committed? And he, sorry, my kids are blowing my phone up. And he said, unless it's a continuing course of conduct. The defense attorney gets a little bit snippy here and says, listen to my question. Are you aware of the Ohio Constitution, not the revised code, requires the trial take place in the county the crime was committed? And he said, the agent says, I'm not aware of that specific Constitution you're talking about. So the prosecutor comes back up and says, when you were present when he made that argument? There's an objection that's sustained because they're just going back and forth at this point. He said, the judge ultimately said he would instruct the jury later on this issue. And essentially he was like, don't want to hear it again. So that was those 2 days that just kind of was combined. I will put all these videos up on the drive for those of you who are listening, as well as the picture of Jake with the dark hair. I know a lot of you guys don't have social media. And anyway, so yeah, appreciate you guys. The Lori episode will be later tonight, just a heads up, because I haven't even started reading. I got the documents earlier today. I haven't even started reading through them and making notes, but I do want to get 2 in tonight. So, because I don't know tomorrow if we lose internet, maybe with the wind, we're supposed to get maybe up to 60-mile-an-hour winds and about 5 inches of rain. So I'm going to go buy me an ark to get around, or a boat or something. So anyways, all right, I'll see you guys much later tonight. I don't have to get up early because my kids don't have school. So that one might drop, midnight-ish. We'll see. All right, you guys have a good night. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do YouTube shorts that don't come on the main page. So plan to start utilizing those a lot more. And if you want to support the channel on Patreon, it's just bonuses like extra live streams, no bonus content. The top tier, you get a free t-shirt. It's black, but it's like this. And there's just some perks. I call it Patreon perks because some people just wanted the ad free and then just a way to support every month through Patreon and not through donation. And that's really cool with me. And I'm very grateful. But if you don't subscribe, hey, you still get the same thing. No worries. All right. We'll see you guys later tonight with this Valo Daybell Trouble in Paradise, I think. See you soon.